Hello, my friend. It's the Range Ronin. I sure appreciate you joining me for another At the Range chapter in the Range Ronin Chronicles. I sincerely hope that you enjoy it. So, let me open the book and we'll get going. This chapter in the Range Ronin Chronicles takes you into Part 3 of the Ruger RXM. Why is that, you might ask? Well, in Part 1, I did a full review of the RXM, as best I could. I was not satisfied with my performance with the RXM at the range. The fired rounds were hitting my target to the left of POA. Granted that some of that was my fault, but possibly, just possibly, some of that fault lay with the RXM. The front and rear sight seemed correctly aligned with the center of the slide, but it bothered me that I was hitting consistently left. There was also the fact that I was using the Magpul magazines that came with the pistol. While that does not affect accuracy, it was claimed that the RXM would run with Glock magazines for the Gen 3 G19. I did not have any Glock magazines with me for the first day's outing with the RXM. This led to Day 2 with the RXM. Day 2 was a test of Gen 4 and Gen 5 magazine compatibility with the RXM. Day 2 was a success. While not being an exhaustive test, it did prove that, indeed, the RXM would run 100% with Glock magazines, both Gen 4 and Gen 5. A link to that test can be found in the description below this video. While I was concentrating on function, accuracy was still not present. I always place a lack of accuracy at my feet rather than declaring the firearm inaccurate, and I had to find out why I was not shooting the RXM as accurately as I should. Thus, we come to Day 3, accuracy testing. Now, I am not talking pinpoint target accuracy here. I feel the RXM is not up to that. Combat accuracy, however, concerns me. If I am not somewhat accurate with a firearm at the range, I can expect that to carry over should I have to use the firearm in a self-defense situation. I had to remedy that. First, the rear sight had to be nudged to the right a tad to bring the POI where I wanted it. A sight adjustment tool took care of that issue. I also planned to take the sight adjustment tool to the range, just in case I had to nudge that rear sight a tad back to the left. Then, I had to consider trigger finger placement. I found that I saw a slight improvement in accuracy when I used the first joint of my trigger finger rather than the pad. Next up was my gripping of the RXM. The grip angle is reminiscent of a 1911. The girth and length also seem to be about right for my hand. Could it be the way that I grip the handle? When I adapted to shooting a Glock pistol, I had to force the angle of my wrist more upward, rather than taking a more conventional grip. When I gripped the RXM, I reverted back to my usual wrist angle. Could that be causing a problem? I also did some self-analysis and realized that my wrist and arm was not in line with the pistol, which is common among shooters who use a modified Weaver stance and grip method, as I do. Keeping both eyes open, and since I am cross-eye dominant, my left eye needs to be in line with the rear sight. Sometimes I have to exaggerate that to get a good sight picture. Also, with a still broken right clavicle, getting my right arm, my shooting arm, out straight to line up the pistol with the arm is sometimes difficult, as it causes a shift within the collarbone. I have to tilt my head to the right to get the correct sight picture. Think of the character Horatio Kane in the TV series CSI Miami when he takes a shooting stance. The actor, David Caruso, is cross-eye dominant. and that carries over to the character he portrays, Horatio Caine. So you see, I have a lot of issues that I need to look at. Thus, I am taking you on this trip with me. That, hopefully, will help me master the RXM and possibly, just possibly, may help you to analyze your own shooting technique. Now, prior to filming, I bench rested the RXM to remove as much as me as possible to check zero, and adjustments were made as applicable. I felt that the RXM is ready for offhand shooting. I am just using Fiocchi 115 grain FMJ for this outing. No need to get fancy with heavier bullet weights. Also, and just to let you know, only the Magpul magazines provided with the pistol are being used for this outing, as I am not testing magazines during this range day. First up, taking my usual shooting stance and grip, and fire 15 rounds at the lower shoot and see target. Addressing finger placement on the trigger, I'll just say that I'm asking my trigger finger to do something not natural, pull straight back into the hand. The trigger finger's natural motion is to arc inward toward the hand, and not straight back. The object, when firing a handgun, is to limit that arc as much as possible. Find that sweet spot on the trigger face where movement of the barrel is minimized. Trigger design has a direct effect on trigger pull. The longer the trigger pull, the more propensity the trigger finger has to resort to its natural movement, the arc. The trigger design of a single-action pistol, like the 1911 with its straight back movement, less trigger travel, and sensitivity, a light and crisp break, reduces the likelihood of the trigger finger arcing too much as the trigger is being pulled. Long trigger pulls, like that found in, say, double-action single-action pistols and double-action single-action revolvers, are difficult to operate because of the curved trigger face, the fact that the trigger rolls upward and to the rear during the pull cycle, and the distance it must be pulled to release the hammer, make it very easy to pull the barrel off target. Triggers in most striker-fired pistols are a bit better, as the trigger distance is relatively short and relatively consistent. The flat-face trigger design, as found with the RXM and other pistols, help to negate the natural tendency of the trigger finger to arc during the trigger pull by reducing the distance between the start of the trigger pull and the trip point, nominally at 90 degrees. The amount of tension in the trigger pull, once resistance is felt before the release, also plays a part in accuracy. The less tension before the hammer falls or the striker is released, the better. The RXM had a gritty feeling trigger pull, but that smoothed out after shooting the pistol a while. The tension, although still present, is at least smooth without feeling gritty. I like a bit of tension before the release, as it provides me enough decision time to follow through with the trigger pull or relax and back off of the shot. The gist of this is that the firearm will not adapt to me or to you. Me and you must adapt to the firearm, and that is what I am trying to do. The firearm will tell me what it needs to shoot accurately, but it is up to me to listen to what the firearm is telling me and respond to its needs, if I can. let's see how I did. Next up, straighten out the shooting arm and hand so that the pistol, hand, wrist, and arm is in one straight line. The top shoot and see target is the focus of my attention. Again, let's see how I did. I said to myself, "Self, before I do any upgrades on this pistol, like a black Magpul frame, pistol needs to be worthy of such, which means it must be reliable and accurate." The reliability was without question. The RXM ran fine with the provided Magpul magazines, and with Glock G19, Gen 4 and Gen 5 magazines. The accuracy, however, needed to be established, which I did with this chapter of the Ruger RXM review. With a slight rear sight adjustment for my eyes and better concentration on things like grip, stance, and trigger discipline, the RXM seems to be a viable tool for self or home defense. In short, I am going to go ahead with the grip upgrade, the EHG RG9 Grip Ruger RXM Compact. I may do a later video on the process of exchanging grip frames, but for now, it's way overdue with ending this chapter. I am glad you stuck with me, and until we meet again, and I truly hope that we will, take care of yourself, stay vigilant, armed, and safe out there.